In today's episode of our photography review show, we're gonna review landscape, mixed team, and wildlife photographers. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. I hope you had a great week, and I hope you're ready for more photography reviews. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jakub, and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. For the past 7 or 8 months, I've been reviewing your photos, and I review thousands of images from hundreds of photographers. It's a lot of fun, and if you want to join us, all you need to do is to join our photography membership, Clever Photographer Plus. You can find out more about it on our website, cleverphotographer.com, but basically for a little fee, you will get a monthly themed bundle full of photography tools, including overlays, textures, presets, LUTs, and so much more. You will also get access to our Clever Photographer Academy, as well as this photography review show. And here we are back in the Lightroom CC, where we're gonna be doing the reviews. We have 5 photographers to look at, so let's jump straight into it. The very first one is a landscape photographer, Tina. Tina, we have 2 images from you, and let's have a look at the camera details. Unfortunately, the first one doesn't have any, and the second one neither. Tina, it's a little bit a shame because you have sent us the full resolution images in a good quality, however, no camera details. Now, when you share the details with me and with us, it's a little bit easier then to give you guiding points to what you could do differently. So maybe for the future. Anyway, still we will look at the images. So let's start with this one. First, an initial talk about the technical part of the image. So looking at it from this point of view, the sharpness is looking very good. Let's have a look if there is some noise. Well, that was way too much. So somewhere around here. The noise is very reasonable. Looking at the clouds and the darker parts of the image, it's quite well done. The sharpness is good as well. The light is very interesting. The exposure is good with lots of nice drama clouds hanging over the mountains. So all of that put together with a nice saturation, I think technically it's looking very good to me. So on this image, technically, good job. Of course, there's a lots of details on a foreground, but very good amount of details coming all the way through. Now then, looking at this image, talking about, again, a technical part of your image. It's a lovely sunset or sunrise with beautiful details in the sky, lovely amount of warm glow. However, when I zoom in, I can see some kind of artifacts. First, it's looking almost like a painting, so I'm assuming there was some maybe noise reduction done to it or something like that, which really makes it look a little bit unnatural. As well as looking at the field, again, when you zoom in, you see all the details kind of melting together, so that's maybe because of a movement. So really, when I compare the 2 images next to each other, I think the first one technically was done a little bit better, maybe also because the lighting condition is a little bit easier. It's still very nice sunset here with lots of nice things happening. However, I can really see lots of artifacts happening around, which maybe would need a little bit of fixing. I think the biggest thing I see is that the result after some portion of editing is making it look really a little bit like a watercolor painting. So I think that's something that is not great. However, it's not the end of the world. Still, very lovely sunset photo. When it comes to composition here, well, the composition is very nice. I would probably crop it a little bit tighter than it is. Looking at it, thinking about balance of the composition, you have these kind of wave of dark areas here. You have the field kind of hanging towards one side. So what I would do, I would jump into the crop tool here, maybe use the 16:9, and then kind of turn it around just to kind of balance it all together and place the sunset or the sun in the center as it is our main subject. Once I would be happy with the result, I would just hit enter and end up with something like this, which is a little bit more natural and more balanced composition with a little bit more impact, trying to avoid some of the areas of the photo that are not completely unnecessary. After that, I think the foreground of the field and then the midground of the tree are quite nice. It helps us with the depth, and altogether, I think it's quite nicely done. Now with this one, when it comes to balance, it's a little bit a similar story. However, it's not going to be as easily fixable. And the reason being is this dark tree. Now, when it comes to balance of a composition, you're looking for a balance of like a scale on each side similarly. And obviously with the dark tree and the brighter areas on the other side, it's really kind of falling towards this side. It's not the end of the world. However, it's just one thing to look out for. Other than that, I think it's looking quite nice. I wish we could see more of the valley and get some kind of sort of a sense of flow and leading lines. However, it's still very well done and I'm quite happy with it. There is good amount of the sky. You could maybe crop a little bit of it. However, still altogether, it gives us nice zones and it creates a nice and pleasing image. So I think composition wise, I would leave it the way it is because we don't want to crop away the tree, and that's about it. Now, when it comes to post-processing, it's quite nice and natural. Let's have a look at the white balance in a color. When we go for auto, so maybe a little bit of extra tint, trying to remove some of the green tint in most of the parts of the image. Now, quite often when we're photographing images where there is lots of blue or lots of green, these colors, these dominant colors, then start to leak in other parts of the image. And by pushing the tint a little bit or the warmth, we remove them and make the result a little more natural. When I show you the before and after, you will see what I mean. Finally, on this image, what we could do, we could maybe close it a little bit more. We can do that by using something like vignette, so maybe something like this, and then using little maybe a radial gradient, placing it in the center, increasing the exposure and bringing more attention towards the center of the image is also a good idea. If you would want to really play around, you could use a brush and maybe make some of the clouds a little bit darker to add additional drama to some parts of the image. So maybe something like this and maybe this. And I think that's about it. Finally, if we would really want, we could brush with a little bit of dehaze over these mountains to maybe get some parts back. Of course, we need to fix it with the white balance. However, if we do that, we need to remove it from the clouds here because I think that's a bit too much. We also need to add a little bit of warmth to it and maybe bring the exposure up a little bit too. Adjust the dehaze, don't make it that strong, and we get something like this. Let's have a look at the before and after, and that's about what I would do with the image. Moving on to the second image and post-processing. Now, obviously the sun is very, very nice. So again, I would probably try to use a little bit of vignette to close it even further. Then I would use some masking and linear gradient to close it from the bottom to add more attention towards the center. So let's have a look at it. Linear gradient, something like this, and minus exposure. So that's looking good. One more radial gradient around the sun, just adding more attention to it. A little bit of extra exposure, a little bit of temperature, and minus clarity to add softness to it. So I think that's about it. The only thing I would finish with is maybe bringing down the saturation just a little bit to make it more natural, and you can counterwork it with a little bit of vibrance. Tina, that's about it. That's what I would do with the images. Lovely two captures. I'm loving the sky and a beautiful sun, as well as a really epic view. Altogether, just a few things which you could look at differently for the future. So I hope you're going to enjoy the review. I hope you're going to send us more images. And until next time, thank you very much. The photographer number 2 is Evgeniy. Now, Evgeniy, we have 2 images from you here. This beautiful cat taking a rest on the steps. And then we have this lovely bee, obviously feeding itself on the flower. So let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at the camera details. On both of them, same camera, Pentax K100D Super. And on this one, when it comes to camera settings, ISO 200, 300 millimeters with 1/350th second on the shutter speed, making it really lovely with good amount of depth at the back and lots of details on the animal as well as the flower. Now the light is a little bit harsh, but I don't think it's the end of the world. There is a lovely light coming from behind, giving it a little bit of backlight, and I think that looks very, very nice. Now, looking at the cut and talking about technical part of the image, ISO 200, 70 millimeters, f8, 1/250th of a second. So I think camera setting is great. 70 millimeters is not that zoom in. f8, making sure that everything is nice and sharp. And 1/250th of a second, making sure that the cut is nice and full of details. The light is very nicely done here with just a little bit of light coming on her paw. Everything else is nicely diffused, hiding in a shadow, and it ends up in a very, very lovely result. Again, the amount of details is very good. The light is very pleasing, as I mentioned, and I think it looks all very nice. Now, when it comes to composition, the only thing I would adjust here is the rotation. I think she's again a little bit of falling, so I would maybe rotate it around just a little bit to make it look a little bit more natural. And other than that, I think it's looking great. Obviously, the cat is sleeping, so that's looking great. We could maybe remove a little bit of the bottom of the scene to add more attention towards the cat, so to get something like this, but it's really just very artistic detail, which is not completely necessary. Still, a very lovely picture, beautiful animal, all in a frame with lots of lovely details and a very pleasing light. Very, very well done, Evgeniy. Now, looking at this image, obviously, the animal is the main subject. So let's have a look. Where is your third, which is on a good spot? We have the kind of supporting subject here with the flower on it. That is looking great as well. We could rotate it around, but I'm quite happy with it. I'm quite happy with the space here, which is giving us a little bit of path around the main subject. And I think it's creating a lovely scene, which is actually very nicely done. There is a lot of space around the animal to give it a sense of freedom. So altogether, I think the picture and the composition works very, very well. Now, when it comes to post-processing, I wouldn't actually change much here. I think it's nicely done. The colors are nice. The white balance works for me. What we could do with, we could push a sharpening a little bit if we want to in the details. Nothing crazy, but maybe something like 20. And we could again use something like brush and maybe with some extra exposure add a little bit more attention on the animal itself. We could do the same on the flower and create something like this. After that, I think we are done on this one. Coming back to the cat, not much I would add here other than maybe a little stronger vignette, which we can do in the effects. Something like this. And again, with a little bit of local adjustments and brush, we can maybe add a little more attention towards the cat herself. And something like this. And that's it. Altogether, lovely 2 images. Evgeniy, thank you so much for sharing them with us. You take care, stay safe. And if you have more images, make sure you send them for the next episode. Which brings us to John Dalston. John, we have 2 images from you. My favorite subject and model with the cat this time, which has been great. Very, very lovely image. And then this kind of street photography capture, I'm assuming, with the kind of man coming down on these stairs with very kind of industrial style view. So let's have a look at it. Starting from here, let's have a look at the camera details. Nikon D850 with the lens 24 to 70 millimeters. Camera settings, ISO 100, so that's spot on. 58 millimeters, f6.3, 1/250th of a second. So ISO spot on, making sure that everything stay nice and without noise. 58 millimeters is a great lens for, or the settings for a portrait. F6.3 is an interesting choice. I'm assuming maybe managing the ISO as well as the shutter speed, which is fine. Again, we have quite nice blur at the back, so that works quite nicely. And 1/250th of a second with a human generally works quite well. As long as they still, you should be able to get nice sharpness on it. So let's zoom in and let's have a look. Well, not that much. Let's zoom in and let's have a look what we see here. So nice details on the hair, on the eyes. Obviously, that's where your eyes goes first. Also the ears, the cat is kind of pointing away. There is a touch of sharpness missing on her face, I think, but the fur is nicely done. Altogether, I think quite nicely done. Maybe with the shutter speed you could have gone a little faster, but then I'm assuming you would have to start to introduce maybe higher ISO. So as a combination, I think it works very nicely. Now with the light, I don't mind the light from the sign. I think that creates a very nice kind of mysterious effect, especially when the cat is looking towards this direction. I think that works very well. One thing that I think is not balanced that great is her face compared to the rest of the body. Her face has lots of light on it. It's really bright, at least the image I'm looking at. And then the rest of the body, except again, the parts that are facing the light coming from the side, is really dark compared to it. So 2 options, either to brighten up this body a little bit more or darken her face just a little bit. Now, I'm all for making the face a little bit brighter, but it's really visible. It's like you pointing a torch at her and the rest of the body is just dark. So that would be just my suggestion. Other than that, I think it creates very nice scene. Again, it's very kind of creative way to do it. There's lots of kind of mixture of contrast, color contrast, luminance contrast. However, that would be one thing I would look at doing differently. Technically, let's have a look at this image here. So we are on Nikon D700, 35mm lens, 1.4 on f-stop. And now camera settings, ISO 100, 35mm, 1.4 f-stop, and 1/50th second on the shutter speed. So 1/50th second for the shutter speed is the reason why he is a little bit blurry, so that's fine. I would preferably see him being even more blurry, so it looks like it was your intention, rather than that the camera wasn't set right. So that would be just me, but it still works quite well. The rest of it is nicely done. There is a lots of kind of light effects happening around, with a little bit of light here and on the stairs. I think it creates very, very nice scene with a lovely amount of details and well-handled low-light situation, even with 1/50th of a second. Now, continuing with the composition. Although I'm a big fan of these industrial takes, I'm always looking for compositionally pleasing scenes. So that, for example, these green bins are a little bit shame that they're here, because I think they are a little bit distracting. Definitely in a scene where most of the tones are really almost coming towards the monotone or monochrome. So then suddenly in the middle of the scene, the green is really standing out, and it's not the most appealing subject to have there. So that would be one thing I would wish it wouldn't be there. Also, obviously, a little bit of depth is missing here, because there is nothing really to build our depth on. You have nothing, and then you have the steps, which are really kind of glued towards the wall. You don't see the space between. So I think we're missing a little bit of some elements that would help us with the depth on the image. It's good that the human is there, because it helps us with the scale. However, those are the few things I would be thinking of for the future. Now, when you're taking pictures straight on, it's something that you have to place there or find that can really help us with the depth. If you would go a little bit towards the side and maybe have more kind of side view of the stairs, you would get a little bit more depth out of that. Now, coming back towards the girl and talking about the composition, I actually think it's very, very well done. It's a lovely kind of portrait shape and frame with the cut, again, looking towards the side, works very well. Even more so when the light is coming from there. Obviously, the eye contact with the camera works extremely well here, and it's very, very nicely done. The background worked well as well, although it's a little bit kind of busy for my liking. I would probably like to have it maybe black and white at least, or if color, then it's just there are lots of different shades. You have the kind of black and white, and then shades of gray, and then we go into the brown, and then we have lots of these kind of different shades of brown, and then we have a bright again, and it's just lots happening around her. And in the case when the model isn't as contrasty with a maybe choice of her dress color, or maybe the hair, which is kind of ginger, again, kind of blending a little bit with the background. It's kind of all happening at the same time, and there is a lot happening in that scene. So something to kind of work on is maybe thinking either about her dress to be a little bit more contrasty, or turning the background to black and white to be just contrasty and simple, and stuff like that. When it comes to post-processing, I told you already on this one, I would play around with the amount of brightness on her face. We could obviously make it darker, which is never really that great idea. We could then make the rest of the body maybe brighter, just maybe something like this. How much would we have to go for it to look more natural? Well, something like this would then start to look, I think, a little bit more natural compared to the before. We could then maybe create another brush where we would actually go the other way. And now we can maybe paint in some contrast in some parts where the contrast makes sense. So for example, under her hand, it would be darker. Under her chin here, it would be darker as well. And maybe in this part, it would be darker as well. And I would create something like this. So when you look at it before and after, it's a less contrast with the face. So that's what I would do here. The rest of it is fine. On this one, not much I would change here, to be honest. The white balance is nice, the brightness is nice. It would be more the composition I would look at and see how I could improve it, if there are some elements I could work with in the future, and that's about it. John, thank you very much for sharing the images with us. It's always a pleasure to reviewing them for you. If you have more, make sure you send them to us soon. Which brings us to Zdenek. Zdenek, 2 more images, and this week with an elephant. Huge elephant with obviously maybe in the middle of a rain because there is water coming from him. And then looking at the picture here, lovely landscape picture with nice flow created with this dirt road here. So let's have a look at both of the images. Starting with this one, looking at the information. Canon 600D with the ISO 100, 18mm, f8, 1/160th of a second. So starting with the technical part, I think technically the camera is well set. Again, ISO 100, making sure that we don't create or add any additional noise. 18mm is really wide, but I think it quite works for this scene. f8 on the f-stop and 1/160th of a second. So that's making sure that it gives us enough on the exposure and also level of the details in the sky. Now in overall, when I look at the image, it looks a little bit underexposed, but that's something we can look at a little bit later. Other than that, the level of details is quite nice. Here, it does have an interesting light. A little bit of diffuse light looks actually quite nice here. Now, looking at this one, it's a Canon 600D 55 to 250mm on the lens and ISO 640 79mm f5 1/100th of a second. So looking at the camera setting here, it's quite high ISO, but obviously trying to manage the shutter speed in a combination with the low f-stop, which makes sense. 79mm giving us a chance to capture the animal in a realistic resolution with all the body in. So that looks quite good. When we zoom in, the level of details is very nice, and with a little bit of rain being captured as well, I think you've done pretty well here. When it comes to composition, again, as always, I would wish there would be a little bit more space in front of him, just to kind of get a little bit more breathing space for the main subject, but still I think it looks quite nice putting it like this together. Lovely colors, not too much of a depth. Obviously with f5 you would think that you get a little bit more, but still the result is great. It's a magnificent animal. Now looking at this one and talking about composition, the composition is nicely done here. The flow is great. Obviously there is kind of foreground, middle ground, and background that works very well. The amount of sky is nicely handled as well. The only thing I would do, I would maybe just tilt it a little bit more to get a little bit more realistic look. Other than that, I think it's looking good. Now when it comes to post-processing, I have to say the colors are not great and the light is not great. Now when you look at it like this, what you could do, you could always turn it to black and white and make it really contrasty. So you could kind of push the whites and blacks and see if you could do something with that. Or you could see if you could maybe play around with the dodge and burn. Definitely start with bringing the vignette down and then play around with the brush, which you could add some exposure and maybe brighten the road a little bit more, and then add another brush, add a minus exposure, and then paint on these areas, then adjust it and get a little bit of that. You could paint over the hill at the back to bring a little bit more contrast altogether, also over here. And that's about it. Zdenek, that's about it. Let's have a look at your white balance to finish it off and see what it's gonna give us there. It gives us a little bit more temperature, which I don't think is completely necessary. So altogether, this is where I would leave it. Even though the composition is great, for some reason the colors and the exposure isn't that great, so I don't know what condition you capture it in, but still great thinking about the composition. Now on the animal, I actually think it's very, very nice. I think the colors are great. I love the level of details. I love the edit here. I love the texture. I think the color of the kind of foliage as well as the road or the kind of ground he is standing on, I think it's working very nicely. Of course, this picture would look brilliantly as a black and white, but that's not because it has to be black and white, it's just that it would look really, really nice, but it doesn't have to be. And to be honest, there is not much I would do differently here. I think it's looking great. This is totally a picture you could go ahead and print and have it in a frame and look at it for the years to come. So I'm sorry, Zdenek, I don't have much things to tell you today and help you. Altogether, they are great two images. This one I love a lot. Again, I always love to see animals from Africa and from your camera. So thank you for sending them over. You take care, stay safe. And if you have more images, make sure you send them to us soon. Moving on the next picture and last photographer, we have Ken. Ken, we have two images here, two birds. And looking at it like this now, I'm assuming it's the same bird. Bird, which is absolutely lovely. And let's see, it doesn't really say what bird it is. However, it's beautiful. Now, looking at it, starting with the first image, we are on Nikon Coolpix P900 with the camera settings ISO 110, 116mm, f5.6, 1/500 of a second. So the ISO is well managed, 110 is perfect, 116mm is nice and zoom in with really nice and tight crop, f5.6 giving us a lovely level of details with a nice soft blur at the back, and 1/500 of a second giving us lots of details even though the bird is moving. Then moving to the next picture, also really nicely done. Again, ISO nice and low, so 100, 46mm giving us a little bit of wider view of the bird, f4.5 giving us that lovely blur at the back, and again 1/800 of a second giving us the details and the sharpness. Ken, I love the images. I have to say that I was a little bit sad last week that I couldn't really look at your eagle pictures. Now this is a different story. Those two are great. And coming together as a series of images, they are brilliant. Same style, lovely pictures. I especially love this image where the cropping is a little bit tight. However, it creates lovely, lovely view. So talking about this one, composition-wise, I think it's working great. The bird in the center with nice space around it to add and create lovely contrast. I think that works excellent. We can see the eye, we can see the beak, who is kind of cleaning himself. I think it's very well balanced on each side of the image. And altogether, it's an excellent photo. Talking about this picture, again, great. The bird is there in the whole size, sitting on some kind of branch, which again looks very well. The contrast is excellent. Again, lovely amount of colors with a nice backlight coming through the fur and for the feathers. Again, creating very, very nice image with really, really lovely result. For the post-processing, what I would do, I would double check my white balance in the color. And really, the only thing which I agree with here is maybe adding a little bit of tint to remove some of the green tint. Let me show you before, when you have lots of green on the bird, and after when it kind of disappears. Other than that, maybe just a little bit of additional vignette goes a long way. And as always, maybe little brushing with the extra exposure, painting over the bird, making sure that he stands out even more. Finally, on the second image, again, I would do the same. I would double check my white balance by going into auto, looking at it again, removing some of the green tint from his body. And then similarly, maybe in the effects, just adding a little bit of vignette to the overall image. Altogether, Ken, I love the two images. They are brilliant. I'm really happy to see them. You should be proud of them. And thank you very much for sending them to us. I hope to see more images from you. And that's it for today. Folks, thank you very much. The same goes for all of you. If you want to join us, make sure that you send us your images while also join our membership, Clever Photographer Plus. You can find out more about it on our website, cleverphotographer.com. And for today, thank you very much for watching. You stay safe, take care, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.